This show is part of OnePlace, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to the briefing. We are tracking a major naval escalation in the Middle East and a constitutional showdown over White House records. Here is what you need to know for today.
The U.S. Navy seized an Iranian ship after engine fire.
The Justice Department claims presidents own their official records.
Suspicious market spikes preceded major White House policy posts.
Canada's leader calls U.S. economic ties a major weakness.
Face the Nation explores the fragile Strait of Hormuz.
Ambassador Mike Waltz rejects any trust-based deal with Iran.
Secretary Chris Wright defends the president's creative negotiation tactics.
Marjorie Taylor Greene questions the 2024 assassination attempt details.
First, the naval seizure. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz has reached a boiling point after the U.S. Navy seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship called the Tauska. President Trump confirmed the action on social media, stating that the USS Spruance intercepted the vessel in the Gulf of Oman. According to the president, the Navy gave the ship fair warning to stop, but the Iranian crew refused to comply. This led the Navy to fire on the ship's engine room to disable it. U.S. Marines now have custody of the vessel, which was already under Treasury sanctions for a history of illegal activity. This move is a significant escalation of the current blockade, where the U.S. has already forced 25 commercial vessels to turn back or return to Iranian ports to enforce compliance.
CENTCOM released a statement clarifying that the standoff lasted for 6 hours before the decision was made to fire. They described the action as deliberate and proportional. This comes at a very sensitive time as U.S. officials, including Vice President Vance and Jared Kushner, are heading to Pakistan for talks with Iran. However, Iran's state news agency says the government has declined to join, citing Washington's excessive demands and the ongoing naval blockade as a breach of the current ceasefire. President Trump has doubled down on his rhetoric, warning that if a deal isn't reached, the U.S. will knock out every power plant and bridge in Iran. He explicitly stated that the era of being nice is over, signaling a much more aggressive stance as the blockade continues to choke Iranian maritime traffic.
Now to presidential records. A major legal battle is brewing over who actually owns the records created during a presidency. For decades, the Presidential Records Act has mandated that White House papers and electronic messages belong to the public and must be preserved by the National Archives. However, the Trump Justice Department has recently issued a memo arguing that this law is unconstitutional. They claim it violates the separation of powers by allowing Congress to regulate the executive branch's internal autonomy. T. Elliott Geiser, head of the Office of Legal Counsel, wrote that the act is a burdensome regime, untethered from any valid legislative purpose. This shift represents a fundamental break from how both Democratic and Republican administrations have handled records since the post-Watergate era, when Congress first acted to ensure that no president is above the law regarding historical transparency.
Historians are already taking the administration to court to stop this move. Matthew Connolly, a history professor at Columbia, argues that this is an attempt to make the presidency answerable to no one, not even the court of history. He believes it shows contempt for the rights of citizens to hold their government accountable. On the other side, supporters of strong executive power, like former Deputy White House counsel Gene Hamilton, argue that Congress shouldn't have the authority to tell the president how to manage his own office's documents. The outcome of this case will determine the fate of millions of records from Trump's second term and set a massive precedent for future leaders. If the law is struck down, the public's ability to understand the inner workings of the White House could be permanently diminished.
Next, insider trading concerns. The BBC has uncovered a troubling pattern of market activity that suggests some traders might have advanced knowledge of President Trump's major announcements. By analyzing trade volume data, they found consistent spikes in specific markets just minutes or hours before the president makes significant statements on social media or in interviews. For example, on March 9th, oil bets surged nearly an hour before a reporter posted about an interview where Trump said the war with Iran was nearly complete. When the news finally hit the public, oil prices plunged by 25%, meaning those early bettors made millions. While some analysts argue this is just the work of very adept traders who can anticipate the president's moves, others say it has all the hallmarks of illegal insider trading based on non-public information that should be strictly protected.
Another instance occurred on March 23rd, when Trump posted about a productive conversation with Tehran regarding a total resolution to hostilities. Just 14 minutes before that post, There was an unusually high number of bets placed on falling oil prices. When the post went live, oil dropped by 11% almost instantly. These patterns aren't just limited to oil. They appear across several financial markets tied to the president's diplomatic and economic interventions. Diplomatic observers were caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone toward Iran, yet the market data suggests some individuals were ready for it. This raises serious questions about who has access to the president's communications before they are released. Whether it's a leak from within the administration or just incredibly lucky timing, the financial stakes of these perfectly timed trades are enormous.
Moving to Canadian relations. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has delivered a blunt assessment of his country's relationship with the United States, calling their close economic ties a weakness that must be corrected. In a 10-minute video address, Carney argued that the world has become more dangerous and divided, and that the U.S. has fundamentally changed its approach to trade. He pointed to the high tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, which he compared to levels seen during the Great Depression. These tariffs have hit the Canadian auto and steel industries particularly hard, creating a pall of uncertainty that is holding back business investment. Carney's message was clear. Canada can no longer rely on its southern neighbor as a stable partner, and must diversify its economy by seeking new investments and trade deals with other nations to ensure its own national security.
This shift in rhetoric follows a period of high tension, including comments from President Trump suggesting Canada should become the 51st state. Carney, a former central bank governor, has been vocal about the shift in global power and previously condemned economic coercion by great powers at the World Economic Forum. That speech earned him a sharp rebuke from Trump, who reminded Carney that Canada exists because of the United States. Despite the pressure, Carney is moving forward with plans to double clean energy capacity and reduce internal trade barriers. He recently secured a majority government and is under pressure from the opposition to deliver a new trade deal before the North American Free Trade Agreement review in July. Carney promised Canadians he would not sugarcoat the threats they face as they navigate this increasingly volatile relationship.
Next, Face the Nation. On the latest broadcast of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan focused on the fragile ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran, which is being threatened by the struggle for control over the Strait of Hormuz. This waterway is vital, carrying about 20% of the world's oil supply. Tensions spiked this weekend when Iran reversed course, closing the strait and firing at vessels. President Trump was featured in a clip asserting that Iran cannot blackmail the U.S. by closing the passage. The program also covered the president's new executive order loosening restrictions on psychedelic drugs as part of his initiative to make America healthy again. With a new pick for the head of the CDC and ongoing redistricting wars being discussed by former Attorney General Eric Holder, the episode highlighted a domestic and foreign policy agenda that is moving at a breakneck pace.
The show also provided details on the upcoming talks in Islamabad. 3 White House officials confirmed that Vice President Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner will lead the delegation. This high-level group is tasked with negotiating a deal, while the president continues to issue ultimatums about destroying Iran's infrastructure. Brennan also noted that traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is at a near standstill, which is causing energy prices to spike globally. Former energy security advisor Amos Hochstein joined the program to analyze how long these price increases might last if the conflict persists. Additionally, the broadcast touched on Pope Leo's tour through Africa, where he downplayed his recent public disputes with President Trump. It was a comprehensive look at a week where global energy security and high-stakes diplomacy are clashing in real time on the world stage.
Now, Mike Waltz's stance. UN Ambassador Mike Waltz made it very clear on Face the Nation that the United States will not be taking an approach based on trust in its dealings with Iran. As officials prepare for the second round of talks in Islamabad, Waltz emphasized that any potential agreement must be both verifiable and enforceable. He described the upcoming sessions as a continuation of the terms offered by Vice President Vance last week, which the Iranians have so far refused to accept. Waltz argued that the U.S. is currently engaging at the highest level in history, and he believes the Iranian regime is more diplomatically isolated than ever before. He pointed to the devastated state of the Iranian economy as a reason why they will eventually be forced to come to the table and abandon their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
Waltz also addressed the internal state of the Iranian government, noting that they appear to be in a state of chaos following devastating strikes on their leadership. This lack of stability on the Iranian side reinforces the U.S. position of zero trust. He mentioned that the International Atomic Energy Agency would play a key role in ensuring any deal is actually followed. The presence of Vice President Vance in the negotiations is intended to show just how serious the U.S. is about these terms. While Iran's state media claims they haven't even decided if they will participate, Waltz remains confident that the pressure of the blockade and economic sanctions will leave them with no other choice. The goal remains a total resolution that ends the nuclear threat and stabilizes the region, but only on terms dictated by Washington.
Next, creative negotiation tactics. Energy Secretary Chris Wright defended President Trump's aggressive rhetoric toward Iran, calling him a creative negotiator. During interviews on Fox News and CNN, Wright was asked about the president's recent threats to destroy every power plant and bridge in Iran if they don't accept U.S. terms. Wright argued that the president is using every possible lever to gain an advantage over the regime and bring the conflict to an end. He suggested that using uncertainty and extreme pressure is a strategy that has consistently led to good results over the last 16 months. According to Wright, the ultimate goal is to stop the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran and ensure the free flow of goods through the Strait of Hormuz, which would rescue neighboring countries from constant terror and stabilize global energy markets.
When questioned by Jake Tapper on CNN about whether striking civilian infrastructure could be considered a war crime, Wright dismissed the concern, stating he wasn't worried about that. He maintained that the president is simply seeking maximum leverage. This isn't the first time Trump has used such intense language. Earlier this month, he warned that a whole civilization would die if the Strait of Hormuz wasn't opened by a specific deadline. That ultimatum was followed by the announcement of a 2-week ceasefire, which Wright sees as proof that the tactics work. The administration's stance is that these high-stakes threats are necessary to break the stalemate in peace talks. By keeping the Iranian regime off balance with unpredictable and severe warnings, they believe they can force a resolution that a more traditional diplomatic approach could not achieve.
Finally, the assassination investigation. Former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is publicly questioning why President Trump isn't doing more to uncover the truth about the July 2024 assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. She recently amplified a post from a J6 activist that described the details of the shooting as weird, specifically mentioning the perfectly timed photograph and Trump's general refusal to talk about the event in detail. Greene argued that the family of Corey Comparatore, the man killed during the rally, deserves to know the full truth about the shooter, Matthew Crooks. While she clarified that she does not believe the event was a hoax, she expressed frustration that the president isn't leading the charge for more information. This comes as a growing number of Trump supporters and right-wing pundits have begun promoting various conspiracy theories about the shooting's origins.
The FBI's final report concluded that the shooter acted alone, but some Republican lawmakers have claimed the investigation was stonewalled. Trump himself has been relatively quiet about the day, telling the BBC last year that he doesn't like dwelling on it. However, the imagery of the event remains central to his political identity. Shortly after taking office for his second term, the White House replaced a portrait of Barack Obama with a painting of the famous photograph showing Trump with a raised fist. Despite this symbolic embrace, the lack of a detailed public accounting from the president has allowed skepticism to fester within his own base. Greene's comments highlight a rare moment of public pressure from a close ally, urging the president to be more transparent about an event that nearly cost him his life.
That's the briefing for today. Join us again tomorrow for more focused coverage of the stories that matter most. Have a great day.